More than 200 events of all levels are planned. More than 10 cities will participate in it. So, Russian presidency will be building the consensus. We will continue to cooperate on strategic partnership and security, economy, finance, culture. We plan to build attention to stepping up on the political cooperation on the main international forums, also cooperate again on the fight against terrorism, money laundering, and so on. We pay special attention to organic participation of new participants in all formats of cooperation within BRICS. In accordance with the decision of the 15th BRICS Summit, it is necessary to develop modalities for a new category of partner states of association. And now for acute agenda, and I'd like to start with I want to respond to many questions which we have been receiving about president election abroad. I had promised you to answer these questions, so here it goes.
Министерство иностранных дел России осуществляет рассылку приглашений для участия иностранных представителей в качестве
international observers to participate.
Года. От имени Министерства приглашаются представители СНГ, Шанхайской организации сотрудничества. Одновременно МВД России оказывает содействие в подборе кандидатур и направлении приглашений наблюдателям, направляемым по линии Федерального собрания Российской Федерации. Это Государственная Дума, Совет Федерации, Центральная избирательная комиссия осуществляет приглашение наблюдателей самостоятельно.
Election Commission. We're talking about the majority of states, especially non-friendly ones. And the countries which had expressed their readiness to send their observers is growing. So very new countries are popping up. This list also includes those organizations which, if we invite them, would look weird. As we know, Russia has left the Council of Europe in March of 2022 due to discriminatory decisions made by this organization. I'd like to say that polling stations will be opened in all countries where there will be diplomatic missions and consular offices of the Russian Federation, including those in the unfriendly countries. Taking into account the fact that in a number of countries, these polling stations will be opened outside the capitals in places of compact residence of our fellow citizens, including those at large sites of Russian economic operators. We will also set up all the stations there. The expected number of the stations, as we count it now, is about 300. Unfortunately, the closure of almost 30 foreign institutions by the decision of authorities of unfriendly states and a significant reduction in size of the Romanian embassies due to the expulsion of diplomats under the far-fetched pretext reduced the possibility of forming additional polling stations. We're talking about countries of the Baltic states, Moldova, Germany, the Czech Republic, Finland, and the US. Compared to the previous elections, this time the number of polling stations will be several times less. We also note threats to voters in unfriendly countries, and even on a regular basis, provocations are seen, as well as illegal demonstrations organized at our diplomatic and consular institutions by so-called activists and, as we call them, sympathizers. So they will stop on an ordinary basis, and we can just fathom what can happen to Russian citizens who will come to vote at our embassies on election day. Then the anti-Russia hysteria will be in full force. We're taking appropriate measures to ensure the safety of polling stations, as well as to protect the life and health of voters and members of the election commissions. We warn everyone who could try to interfere with this work of a polling station for extremism, that there is criminal and administrative liability for such attempts. This is some basic information which we will add more information. We'll keep you informed about the opening of polling stations abroad, about the working hours. We'll give you contact information. All our foreign institutions will be included in this work. You'll be able to follow up on the websites, on the site of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as on social networks. So we're just starting on. This will be a point of the agenda of our briefings from now on, and we'll keep you fully informed. Coming back to the Ukrainian crisis, the Kiev regime does not stop committing bloody terrorist acts, and we can see he's actively incited to do so by the West, which is rampantly pumping the armed forces of Ukraine with weapons of ammunition, sending foreign mercenaries and training the Ukrainian military. On January 21st, the Ukrainian neo-Nazis launched a targeted attack on a market and shops in the Tekstilsky district in the Kirovsky district of Donetsk. This attack turned out to be the most brutal in the recent years. 27 civilians were killed and 25 people were injured, including 2 teenagers. Another monstrous crime of the Zelensky junta was the deliberate terrorist attack carried out on January 24th on an Il-76 aircraft of the Russian military transport aviation. It was hit by anti-aircraft missiles fired by Ukrainian side from the Kharkov region. 6 members were on board, as well as 3 accompanying Russian officers and 65 AFU servicemen. We were transported for a pre-agreed exchange and we all died. Kiev were full aware of this plight. We knew that it was carrying out a humanitarian mission. They still ordered to destruct it. No less cynical was the reaction of Banco, where they first try to rejoice and to tell the citizens about the success of their work. Later on, they tried to deny everything and shift the blame for what happened on Russia. For committing such atrocities, Kiev helps to fuel the fighting interest of the world to the Ukrainian crisis and to encourage its sponsors not only to maintain but also to increase the volume of the amount of financial assistance. So who controls what in Bankova is a big question. But it's not to the representatives of Kiev regime what it should be posed to. It should be posed to those who pump it with ammunition and weapons. We want to ask Washington, London, Brussels, as well as Paris, Berlin, and all those who on a daily basis talk about supporting the so-called young Ukrainian diplomacy. Do you understand who you provide with these weapons, those missiles with enriched uranium? Do you understand who you send billions to? You know what they are getting out of your control, don't you? You have no control over what's happening inside. So we strongly condemn these barbaric crimes of the Zelensky regime, and we strongly condemn all those who made this possible. Without the financial, political, and substantial support that the Kiev regime is getting from the outside, from abroad, such terrorist acts would not be performed. We once again call on all the responsible governments, on international structures, not to stand aside. We call on them to condemn these brutal terrorist attacks. Yes, I will be realistic. So those who think themselves civilized or who try to be civilized, this is a window of possibilities. And it's closing down. Yes, it does sound cynical, but this is true. Let me remind you of the years of the Second World War. Not all countries turned to the side of anti-fascism. We supported the Third Reich at first, but later on we all had their own motivation. Some of them had stinges of conscience. Some understood what was happening in reality. Some saw what the USSR was winning. All of them had different motivation. But those who did manage to take the side of kindness before we ended the war, all those became well-respected countries and communities for years to come, and those who were not in time were condemned. And for years to come were literally condemned, ashamed. So this possibility is still around. And we see how countries, international organizations all over the world start questioning themselves. So what makes them stand by the side we are at now? The answer is evident. Some are scared. Some are being harassed to stay at this side. But let me say once again, the understanding of what is happening, I think, is starting to spread in this world, and it's separately what we appeal to the Kiev puppeteers from the civilized countries with cowardly silence, even in response to those terrorist attacks. It is just making it evident what is happening. It's self-revelation. It equals supporting terrorism and extremism. And now for justice. The courts of the Russian Federation, based on evidence collected by the Investigative Committee of Russia, continue to sentence Ukrainian militants who committed serious crimes against civilians. Mozgavoy, militant of a Nazi Azov battalion who shot 4 civilians in April 2022 in Mariupol, was sentenced to life imprisonment. Another Ukrainian neo-Nazi, Paskalov, received 28 years in prison for the shooting of 2 civilians in March 22 in Mariupol as well. Bendorait Kuzmenko was sentenced to 25 years. He ordered the shooting of 2 civilians in the spring of 2022 in Mariupol. Former members of the National Security and Defense Council for Ukraine have been charged in absentia. The ex-finance minister Shlopak and the former head of the National Bank Kubiva, who together with other high-ranking officials decided to launch this so-called anti-terrorist operation in Donbass and provided its financing at the expense of the state budget. So all Ukrainian criminals will be identified, and they also will answer to the fullest extent of the law. And now for what makes it possible to create to perform terrorist acts. So the West continues to pump weapons into the regime of Zelensky, and is becoming an accomplice to its monstrous crimes. According to French media, the Paris announced the creation of a so-called artillery for Ukraine coalition. The goal is to strengthen support for Kyiv in short and long term. France intends to expand the production of self-propelled artillery system Caesar and deliver 72 such installations to the armed forces of Ukraine in 2024. In the militaristic frenzy, the President Emmanuel Macron declares the inadmissibility of Russia's victory and promises to send about 40 long-range Scalp missiles and hundreds of aerial bombs and other weapons to Ukraine. And I want to remind again to Macron and all those who write his speeches, it was just recently when you said that a strategic blow should be performed against Russia, and now you're rewriting all these papers and coming up with new mottos. The inadmissibility of Russia's victory is the motto now, but please don't waste your paper. You will have to rewrite it again. You'll have to come up with something new. You will not be able to stop us on our way to our victory. Apparently, Paris stubbornly doesn't want to understand that the build-up of the military resistance to the Zelensky regime leads not only to the prolongation of the Ukrainian crisis, but to the death of French citizens as well. Those citizens signed up to help thugs from the armed forces of Ukraine and other formations of this regime. It was clearly demonstrated by the results of a missile strike on January 16 on the base of foreign mercenaries in Kharkov. About 60 French so-called legionnaires were killed, 20 were wounded. The clumsy attempts of the French authorities to hide this from the public led to nothing, because everything with a secret always becomes clear. But it's not only the issue of the French citizens, it doesn't only have to do with them. They would not have been able to do this if it was not for these recruitment agencies and the proactive actions of Paris to support the Kiev regime in recruiting French citizens at the territory of France. Germany continues to empty the pockets of its farmers and our citizens and intends to allocate in 2024 7 billion euros for military assistance to Ukraine. So we'll basically double the support, which is logical. The less the US helps, the more it incites its satellites and its NATO allies to spend more and more. According to the media reports, Berlin is insistently demanding that other EU countries follow it. We do not want to drown by themselves. The main sponsor of the Zelensky regime inside the European Union is Germany, and it will come at a high price to them. That's why we're trying to find somebody else to sponsor this attempt. Bearing in mind that the future isn't clear when it comes to military support coming from the United States, and the fact that it is clear that the outcome of this drama is evident. Against this background, the 18th meeting of a contact group on Ukraine in Ramstein format took place on January 23 this year and turned out to be unnoticed. No promises were made regarding the upcoming supplies of weapons for the needs of the armed forces. And the Kiev clique, fearing that the Western curators will live without money, continues to ingratiate themselves with them. Kuleba at the World Economic Forum in Davos agreed that Ukraine was making the state's best offer on the global security market. That's the way he answers those in Washington who said that financing Ukrainian crisis is the best investment what the U.S. has made recently. This is business. This is just business. Kiev is ready to, as we said, finish the job, which is the fighting at the expense of the Americans, who only need one thing to do, to continue with a stable and financial military assistance. As Kuleba said, Washington will not have to sacrifice its soldiers because this is what ordinary Ukrainian citizens do. They're not numerous now, and as Sergei Lavrov said, for Kiev regime, they are basically cattle now, or for Ukrainian regime. So that's the way we care about regular Ukrainian citizens. So it looks like a conversation between the customer and the contractor. So it's just a great transaction. And the lives of the ordinary Ukrainian soldiers is just what they sell. There is no additional value or just any value. There is just the price. So how much Zelensky will be paid, this is how many more people he will be ready to kill. On January 22nd, the so-called Day of Conciliarity was celebrated in Ukraine. What was timed to this date is the signing by Zelensky of a scandalous or provocative or rather insane decree on historically populated territories of Russian Federation by Ukrainians. Russian Federation is what was written there. It seems that the Kiev regime has finally fallen into historical unconsciousness and has openly declared its claims to a significant part of the Krasnodar territory, as well as Belgorod, Bryansk, Voronezh, Kursk, and Rostov regions of Russia. which is ridiculous and illiterate when disguised as caring to Ukrainians living there who are allegedly suffering for centuries from our country's systematic actions to destroy their national identity.
Oppression and violation of rights and freedoms. As you know, this phrase, "what do they smoke?" is becoming more and more realistic when you read what Zelensky signs. And yet another question comes to my mind. Does anyone doubt what Zelensky would do if he can achieve and attain those Ukrainians or ethnic Ukrainians who live in these territories? Do you think he would give money to them for different concerts under national anthems, or maybe he will buy equipment, special equipment for the concerts, or maybe some special dresses? I think he would mobilize them the same as he mobilized his citizens on the lands under his control. I would like to remind you that until 2024, the Bankovo did not admit the Russian Ukrainians as their compatriots, but cynically claim now about the need to fulfill its international obligations by Russia of civil, social, cultural, and religious rights. For whom is all this story? Maybe for those who are completely illiterate. I would like to remind you once again that until 2024, no claims were received in this regard, apart from these crazy claims that we do not let people speak Ukrainian and nobody understands what they are talking about. The Bankovo demand that they will have the right to receive education in Ukrainian for peaceful assemblies and access to Ukrainian mass media. I'm so sorry, but maybe this could be left without any comments. If not the fact that the Kiev regime throughout many years discriminates the minorities and huge groups, 1 million groups of their own citizens. That is exactly the Kiev regime who almost equated Russophobia in the state policy and holds a total Russification. It was exactly the Kiev regime who almost banned the Russian language and the Russian culture, fixing it on the legislative level. It is the Kiev regime who persecutes its citizens on ethnic ground. These are blatant acts and must be strongly condemned. This requires legislative measures for all those who put this in practice on the territory of Ukraine. And after that, after many years when the Russian language was accessible in the Ukrainian mass media, they have something to say about the protection of the languages in the whole world. The Russian Federation has brought attention of the international community to the flagrant and systematic violations by Ukraine of international commitments in human rights. No one heard us, unfortunately, but all those who should have heard us, I mean the international agencies, did not respond. Such a policy of Zelensky does not raise any questions of the West because they pay him for this. There is still Russophobia, and it remains. And this task was postponed for the better times. It still remains and remained after the Cold War. This task was once again postponed, and right now, when they came to an understanding that has never been when people who live together for a long time who had root ties not only by the states, who had not only families and cultural ties, will not clash with each other. And only then they started to deploy the so-called political scientists whom they introduced into the government of Ukraine as a state for them to adopt laws, legislative decisions on de facto destroying all that connects us, all that we shared, all the values in terms of civilization. And of course, they started paying for that, not only to Zelensky, but also to Yushchenko, to Poroshenko, and to all those who was at that government that time and who ruled contrary to the constitution through coup d'etats. It's fair to say that never or late, this policy will trigger significant problems for its Anglo-Saxons and other patrons. This will happen. I can't tell you the exact date. I cannot tell you how it will happen, but this will happen. And all these facts reaffirm the relevance of the special military operation, demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine, and all the threats coming from its territory. And all the tasks and objectives will be put in practice. Yet another amazing, interesting, according to information of the mass media, we prevented activities of some wire fraud networks organized by Ukrainians and acted under control of the Ukrainian special services. They dealt with illegal activities. They trying to take money from the states of the European Union. Back then, the stolen money were allocated for funding the Ukrainian army. There were about thousands of victims of wire frauds in Spain, Czech Republic, Germany, and other states. These perpetrators worked for the foreign audience and used their position. And the competent authorities gave all the information about 119 identified victims to the EU countries twice back in June and in November 2023. However, all the requests were ignored, guided solely by political motives. The authorities of the EU states pretend that they have not received any information from the Russian side on this topic. As a result, Russian law enforcement agencies do not have a single statement from the victims, which deprives them of the opportunity to open criminal cases. And it's interesting whether the citizens of the European Union, do they know that their government, for whom they voted and for whom they pay taxes, covering up the criminals who stolen money from the citizens of these European states. Moreover, if the European authorities don't do anything right now, so all charges will be lifted from the criminals. So it happens that it turns out by unilaterally interrupting normal cooperation in the fight against international organized, disconnecting outcome from closed channels of information exchange through the competent authorities, the leadership of the EU countries actually neglected the interests of their own citizens in favor of the criminal Kiev regime. They are ready not only to spend billions of pumping Ukraine with weapons, but also turn a blind eye to stealing from ordinary people just in order to help the Kiev regime. And much likely, I like this topic, food security. Grain deal. I believe that after this horrific mass media campaign, in fact, the fraud of international community in favor of accumulations or in favor of receiving some benefits by the leading Western companies, agricultural companies, fertilizers producers, when people came to understand what was behind this propaganda story, there should have been a kind of revelation. But no, this didn't happen. And I think it refers the UN. When I was in the UN and when we received questions, we understood and we received questions. What is happening with the grain deal right now? So let us have a look. What's happening there with the food? Despite the total censorship and unprecedented campaign and Russophobia in the biased mass media, which wanted to deliberate on food security, which our country allegedly undermines, in fact, it looks quite the opposite. Have a look. The EU continuation of the policy, of the solidarity policy with Kiev by any price. In fact, they are ready to cover up the criminals from Ukraine. Right now, in the context of food security, all this causes in the European not only discontent but also a panic. For the first time since the Brussels plan to export agriculture from Ukraine, as you remember, they were called corridors of solidarity. All this was elaborated to feed the whole world. So after that, the farmers of not only 5 coastal bordering countries, which were flooded with cheap agricultural products by Ukraine, I'm talking about Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and now some other farmers are shocked, including whole agricultural associations of the whole EU members. The European farmers were not only discontent but even shocked by the dumping of agricultural products, block the routes, central streets in large cities. They block the work of some agencies and the Western mass media, who told for many years us that we need to save the world because famine is looming and Russia is to blame. So what they are doing when those in the West are dealing with the food issues on the ground, who produce food, came out to the streets, took their lorries and went to the capitals in order to tell the truth. But the Westerns may ignore these facts. They are focused on the Russophobic propaganda. And this topic, demonstrations inside the EU, demonstrations of farmers, they speak about it just a little. They hush up the scale of the problem. The same as it was with the participants of the Economic Forum in Davos. They discussed everything, but not the mass demonstrations of farmers in European countries. Just a small suggestion. Please open up a map of Europe. Have a look at the Western Europe. Find Davos. And then, please have a look which countries are neighbors to Davos, and you will see that along the perimeter of this small point on the map, there are all the countries and cities who at those very weeks and even months are seeing mass demonstrations of farmers. But Davos doesn't see it. There is no information there. I think some Russian hackers cut down some connections or wires, or maybe some internet or TV cable. There is no topic in the mass media or in the corridors of some panel discussions of the Davos Forum. Moreover, the Kiev regime and its Western patrons call the investments and good deals not food deals, but continuation of the hostilities. Can you imagine what this Western civilized world is being transformed into? The social policy of European countries introduced took into an impasse the policy. Even the farmers voice an outcry. They even go out on the streets and ask the authorities to have a listen to them. Even this way, the agriculture, this is a key element of food security, which the West talks a lot in the context of Ukrainian grain. I understand that if we are at the point of 3D, some special food, we see how it is good to eat with those fish and cutlets printed out on the 3D printer. But however, so far, grain, meat, and fish are on our table, and happily we eat them. Maybe have a look what these Western 3D architects of food security did with this real sector of economy and the real sector of agriculture. So this agriculture is not just an element of European economy. After all, payments comes up to this area. For decades, the countries competed for the access to EU shared market. The French, German, Polish, and Greek farmers feeded about 500 million population of the European Union. By the way, year in and year out, the Brussels authorities do not want to hear those who feed them. Amid almost total cleansing of the EU information environment, such a reaction just sounds like an outcry. I think the situation is really bad when the farmers not even claim, but even put a public ultimatum. In fact, the farmers caution that if the EU strategists do not restrict, remains the current regime in this the way it is, so they cannot support the current regime of EU in the future. And what they achieve is quite simple and clear. They ask to restrict agricultural export of Ukraine and to put it in line with the EU standards of quality and phytosanitary. Can you imagine that? Each tomato, each orange in the European Union has a standard. Every item except for that I imported from Ukraine, because this is a project for the West. It's not the country, it's not the nation, it's not the history, it's not a civilization. It's just another project for them, which must exist along the pattern worked out by the West by any means. So all the standards, they put them aside. We can turn a blind eye on everything, even an assassination of their own journalist with the hands of the Kiev regime. Stay away from the standards in agriculture. So everybody forgot about these moral values. Put away our values of these rules and norms of trade and business. This Ukrainian project put a full stop on this. This position document signed on the 23rd of January, Warsaw precisely outlined that security and of the EU consumers must be above all, even above support of Ukraine. Much demonstrations were held in France because this is a major agricultural country. According to the polls, Western polls, almost 90% of the French support local farmers. I think it is very telling to explain the current policy of Paris. The situation is so tense, but you won't see any reports either on CNN or Bloomberg.
So the situation is heated enough. So there are analysts who say that if a compromise is not found in the foreseeable, the countries are in for another round of those Yellow West movement. It's not what their own income, what people are fighting for. What we're trying to say is that, bearing in mind the inner European system that is linked, which does link finance to the development of agricultural complex and the economy. So if it is destroyed, if all opportunities for legal, standardized development of this sphere will be violated in favor of a 100% protectorate of a cave regime across the board, and starting the agricultural complex in the context of shipments to European Union. And it makes me wonder if there will be the same harsh reaction to French authorities to the speeches of your own citizens who are basically driven to despair by the failed economic policy of your authorities. We can still hope that we will change their mind. And as for European Commission, which is the main ideologist of the liberalization of agricultural trade of Europe, what are they doing? For a year and a half, it has not been able to ensure the normal operation of the so-called solidarity corridors, even though it tried to pretend that this initiative was saving millions of people in need from hunger. In fact, cheap and questionable from point of view of quality Ukrainian food was deposited in EU warehouses. European Union was not able to ensure the interests of a fine member countries bordering Ukraine, which suffered the most from overstocking of Ukrainian products, and in violation of all European norms, were informed to independently block access of agricultural exports from Ukraine to their markets. However, Brussels, which is used to making political decisions not based on the real interests of the member states by coming from political attitudes to deter Russia, which is dictated from overseas, will not have it any easier. So such a politically active group of voters, farmers, their opinion will have to be taken into account. Makes me wonder how we will tackle this issue. Will we try to deter people? I don't know. But we see farmer protests are already in full swing, not only in Ukraine's immediate neighbors, but also in Germany and in France. And I'd like to say once again to those who try to see Russian influence, the influence of the Kremlin or Russian hackers there, you cannot find it there. What you see is the pain of people who understand what they are to expect, what the European Union is to expect being bonded by the corporate Western ethics, which is basically the price they have to pay for being a NATO member. The reasons for those strikes are the short-sighted policy of von der Leyen. I think it's a deliberate policy which led to an increase in production costs inside the U.S. and created perfect conditions for unfair competitions on the intra-EU agricultural market due to an overabundance of Ukrainian produce. And now the topic of hypothetical EU membership promised to Kyiv comes on the horizon, and it already is a pain for many European capitals. So how can we digest the Ukrainian agro-industry and finally keep their farmers? Yes, it would all have been laughable if it was not so sad. So what will happen to international food security after this manipulation, insinuations of the West? Well, what is the question? Because Indeed, these things are one and the same. This is a way of manipulating public opinion, and people living in at the expense of others, just for the sake of political interests. And I'd like to say a few words about our relationships with Korea. Unfortunately, it still has to do with Ukraine, because we draw attention to a noticeably increased degree of the official Seoul's rhetoric towards Moscow. What I'm talking about is what we hear and what we read in Korean media. So Russia seems to be, as they say, carrying out military technical cooperation with Pyongyang. And in particular, in an interview with a South Korean newspaper on January 24, the Minister of Defense, Cyprus1Click, without proving any evidence, made accusations that our country allegedly reserved 5.5 thousand containers of weapons, and in response provided assistance to DPRK in the space sphere, including satellite technologies. So, frankly speaking, we only cite this as an example on such insinuations about the Russian North Korean, as we say, illegal quote-unquote military technical cooperation, quote-unquote, are a refrain during contacts of South Korean officials with American patrons and European like-minded people, including the platform of the UN. And in this regard, we strongly reject any attempts by the US or its satellites to illegally accuse Russia. It's not just that we don't have any evidence, it's not just labeling, it's not just misinformation. These are illegal accusations, and it's evident that Washington is behind such statements. And the purpose of this information stuffing is to involve its Asian ally, the Republic of Korea, in the Ukrainian conflict, which is indicated by the remark of the head of the military department of the Republic of Korea about the need to provide, quote-unquote, direct military support, quote-unquote, to Kiev regime, including the supply of lethal weapons. We would like to warn Seoul against such rash steps, which brought to the complete collapse of the once friendly relations with Russia. We emphasize that these accusations are unfounded and unsubstantiated and thus illegal. This stuffing is skillfully used by the US to find additional sources of replenishment of weapons for the criminal regime of Zelensky, as well as to justify plans to promote American military infrastructure in the Asia-Pacific. Let me remind you that Russia has the right to develop friendly relations with the DPRK, and our cooperation with this country has long-standing historical roots and does not threaten the security of neighboring states. Our country is responsibly fulfilling and will continue to fulfill its international obligations within the framework of relevant Security Council resolutions, and if anyone suspects of violating these documents, we should address such claims to UN Security Council, because it's the only body that is endowed with the functions of considering such issues. At the same time, we proceed from the fact that international law must be abided by all the states in its entirety, and not just by Russia, in the context of anti-North Korean sanctions. We appeal to respect the basic principle and norms of international law, so this appeal should be addressed to those who violate them on a systematic basis, such as with the United States and satellites. And another subject which has to do with destabilization of international relations is against the claims made to Russia to de-escalate a situation to the Western blocs to hold defender trainings. We see that we have a provocative nature, and for several months on the territory from Russia to Norway, 90,000 strong groups of forces from 31 NATO member states and Sweden will be active, and this step is consciously aimed at aggravating the situation, increasing the risks of military incidents, and may eventually lead to tragic consequences for Europe. The NATO bloc makes no secret of the fact that during those trainings we will be practicing tasks to, as we say, repel the Russian threat. the chairman of NATO Military Committee, Admiral Rob Bauer, said that it's preparing for a conflict with Russia, and such comments have also been made by the leadership of NATO countries. This how we're trying to justify their own existence in the eyes of millions of Europeans and Americans, as well as the line to contain Russia and to justify the insane growth of military expenditures, as well as to draw attention of public away from failures in terms of the hybrid war at the hands of the Kiev regime against Russia. For our part, we have repeatedly stated and will say once again that there are no plans to attack NATO countries, and moreover, the alliance is well aware of this. However, it was clearly confirmed by the Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg. In his words, Russia does not pose, quote-unquote, a direct threat to the member countries of NATO, quote-unquote. So the question is, if two leaders of a NATO bloc say things that are contrary to one another, is this not schizophrenia? I think there are those in Brussels who can answer this question. Coming up, proceeding, this subject also has to do with NATO and with things that are done by the Western countries in Yugoslavia tragedy celebrating its 25th anniversary. So let me remind you that it has been around since 1999, and on the eve of this anniversary of the barbaric abuse, we would like to say once again, remind you of one of the many provocations committed by NATO during the Yugoslavian crisis of the 1990s, and I'm talking about the Rachak incident, which was staged. It served as a pretext for a massive military operation against Yugoslavia in the violation of all principles of international law. So let me remind you of the chronology. On January 15th of 1999, while trying to detain a terrorist group of Coastal Liberation Army holed up in Rachak, Serbian law enforcement officers were subjected to an armed attack and destroyed more than 4 dozen militants with return fire. However, immediately at the suggestion of the head of the OSCE verification mission in Kosovo, American William Walker, a different version of what happened was invented. In processing this propaganda, Albanian terrorists soon turned into civilians, and Serbian security forces, as we said, were turned into merciless murderers who allegedly committed reprisals against, as we said, innocent civilians. These events are described in detail in a documentary released by Radio and Television of Serbia, and it is available with a Russian translation. We'll provide you with a link to this film in the text of the briefing. And it's worth noting that a Finnish pathologist used those Rachak staged, so we debunked this. For example, the holes in their clothes did not match the wounds on the bodies of those killed. This case was investigated down to such specifics, and it was proved that the dead were dressed in civilian clothes by militants of the Kosovo Liberation Army. However, Western propaganda declared this incident an act of genocide, and which required immediate action. So just fancy that how quickly it was done. Multi-week informational artillery preparation followed. How often do we see this? How many times we do this in our regions? Iraq, Libya, Ukraine, and so on and so forth. It was just a pretext to launch an anti-Yugoslavian military operation. So, as a result of a NATO bombing in 1999, several thousand people were killed in Yugoslavia, including hundreds of children. The country suffered billions of dollars in economic damage, and NATO forces dropped 15 tons of depleted uranium on the territory of Serbia. And these days, the West, starting from Great Britain, who continue shipping depleted uranium to Ukraine, say it's harmless. We even say with its vitamins, which can be used as fertilizers or whatever. Serbia knows what depleted uranium is, because after that it took the first place in a number of oncological diseases in Europe, and Russia has consistently supported our Serbian friends in uncovering the truth about what happened in Yugoslavia in 1999. We see it as military aggression, and we help to convey this information to the world community. The so-called collective West, led by the United States, continue to use the dirtiest methods of information against those countries that oppose Western neocolonialism. Fake news about alleged war crimes of Russian army in Bucha are similar to those which were planted in connection with events in Rachok. Just the same style, the same strategy. The story of the war crimes in Bucha is completely made up, and Russia has evidences of it. We have already presented this evidence in the UN. As it was the case with Serbia in 1999, the purpose of this is to create the necessary information background to justify the criminal actions of the Kiev regime in this case. And continuing with anti-Serbian actions, I would like to say that the situation of the Serbs in Kosovo is becoming critical. The very existence of the native land is called into question, but instead of sounding the alarm, the West is turning away from this problem, is being silent, and the Kosovo Albanian so-called authorities in the spirit of their Kiev Serbophobia are advancing all fronts: security, justice, economy, culture. And once again, I want to pose this question to Brussels and Washington. You said what you guaranteed: peaceful coexistence. You said that you had a Kosovo project under your wing. You said that Serbs had nothing to fear. What was it what you said just recently to Belgrade? That's what you said. If you adopt anti-Russian sanctions and sign all anti-Russian documents, if you solidify with anti-Russian politics, we will provide you with peace. And now the question is, and it's not a rhetoric one, just fancy what would happen to Serbia now, economically, from the point of view of humanitarian law, from the point of view of ethics. If back then, a year and a half ago, Serbia betrayed Russia, would not the same thing? It would have been even worse than it is now. Serbia would have deprived itself of the historic support of Russia. That's what the West was counting on. Talk about the fantastic financial and economic assistance which will be provided to Serbia if they betray Russia. Please remember that it's a vivid example for years to come. This is the Western strategy. According to Belgrade, last year, 178 ethnically motivated attacks on Serbs, including children and their property, were carried out in Kosovo. Since coming to power in 2021, the radical Nationalist Self-Determination Party has recorded a total of about 500 such incidents. And due to this hostile atmosphere, 10% of the Serbs living there, about 12,000 people, were forced to leave the region. The so-called Prime Minister Kurti has put illegal arrests of Serbs on stream as revenge for participation in peaceful protests and as revenge for their possession. In his suggestion, criminal cases of so-called war crimes allegedly committed by Serbs during the Kosovo conflict are being stamped on. And under the pretended pretext of searching for weapons, raids of special forces are carried out in Serb-populated areas. For more than 7 years, an embargo has been in place on the import of goods marked made in Serbia. The illegal alienation of property belonging to Serbs, the squeezing out of them from the administrative structures and communal enterprises continues. In an effort to demoralize the local Serbian communities, the Kosovars are preventing any attempts to consolidate its legal status. Main task of Kurti is to reset his commitment to establish a community of Serbian municipalities in Kosovo. Another question to Brussels is,
it was you who made a guarantee that this won't happen. What can you say to Belgrade and to Serbs? So that is the cynical logic of Mr. Kurti. In order to get rid of this issue, you need to get rid of the Serbs themselves, is his view. Kurti tried to ban financial operations in Serbian dinars, including pension and benefits transmissions, to close branches of the Serb state bank Pashtanska Štedionica. I think it resembles a lot. I think that's the way how the West and Ukraine acts. That's the way how Zelensky and Poroshenko acted against citizens of Donbass when they did not even receive their pensions because they cut off all financial institutions. Likewise, the West cut off all financial institutions to Russia in order to make any payments or pensions. That's the same pattern. He also plans to arm the whole police and not only the special forces with long autoguns and to introduce by the year 2028 compulsory military service under reform of the Seal of Kosovo security forces and make it an army, breaching the UN Security Council 1244. What the West can say, the UN permanent representative has not said a word about these developments, about this resolution and this legal document. And it is very obvious, or maybe the representative of the United States didn't hear about that resolution, because one of the purpose of all I've said is to make the Serbs, draft-age Serbs, to leave their place of residence. The cultural objects are being oppressed, along with the old Orthodox churches. The spiritual history of Kosovo and Metohija is being rewritten in an attempt to represent the Albanese as the original Christian population and the Serbs as invaders who appropriated some other temples not belonging to them. I think that's the way how the Kiev regime acts, by inventing some unexisting church, by blackening the existing church, making persecutions on those who don't abandon the rules and norms of Orthodox Church. I think that's the way Kiev acts when it appropriates churches and temples. And by launching these churches and temples, I think it has nothing to do with criminalism. It's just some demons. Americans and Europeans encourage this ethnic cleansing unleashed by these Kurti and granting visa-free regime to the Schengen zone and pushing for their membership in the Council of Europe. All that they resorted to in terms of Kiev regime since the beginning, under pretext of some benefits, by making them to pursue their Western policy and then making such promises. And after that, you can do whatever you want with the country. Hopeful to put an end to this impasse, Belgrade agreed to meet halfway on car plates, on energy supplies to the northern part of Kosovo. Of course, we will watch closely whether Pristina will use this gesture to oppress non-Albanian population. Such developments must sober those who speak about ability to negotiate of Albina Kurti and blame Serbs of any pending dialogue. That's not the problem of Serbs. That's not the blame of Serbs. That's their plague that the West always promises but never implements all their promises in practices. Only full compliance with the agreements especially with regard to the community of Serbian municipalities in Kosovo, in line with the fundamental resolution of the UN Security Council 1244, we can ensure a sustainable and just solution. And another important day, January 27th,